We're talking about against identity.
Why are we discussing about identity by Douglas Alexander or
Alexander Douglas.
Alexander Douglas, sorry.
Yeah. Well, whichever it is. I saw a review of it, and then Freddie told me he bought it. He found it interesting, so I thought I might do as well.
Well, why don't you tell us about it then?
Well, there are a couple of points that especially intrigue me. One is that he seems to do a good job of explaining how the cultivation of a cultural identity means people, and I'm paraphrasing here, end up impersonating themselves, in that they will find themselves acting out a version of self that they've said, aha, that is me, and therefore in my life I need to impersonate that version of what I think is myself.
All right, I'm going to stop you because a comedy, the definition of a comedy, according to the 7 Basic Plots by what's his name, which is a great book, says that a comedy is all about finding out who you really are, or finding out who you really were anyway. So you think you're one person, and the comedy is that you are not who you thought you were, and you are this person. Yeah. So his answer to that, finding out who you really are, is, or creating who you really are, is that's a fiction.
Yeah, or you could say that the tragedy of cultural identity, this is not him, by the way, we're just making it up, right?
Yeah.
The tragedy is that there is no finding out, because you decided that is me, I am the same as that, that's who I will be. And you kind of upload yourself into a pre-existing self-image.
And the problem with that is you're always changing, and you will never fit it, and it's always another model. So you're always trying to fit into a model that you'll never quite fit into.
Yeah, it is a model. So it's not agency, as in I encounter the world and on the basis of how I encounter it, but it's an encounter. Whereas this is to say, I will only encounter the world through this model. It's like getting inside a Russian doll and saying, I myself will be totally enclosed by this version of myself, which is the cultural identity.
Oh, I also
Doesn't he say that, or am I making it up?
I have also read it as the idea that you're trying to fit a model, and the model is external to you and doesn't bear a great deal of relationship to you, and so you always set yourself up for a fall.
Yeah.
So it's not just that you're enclosed. I read it, the Monty Python thing came along, which was we're all individuals, they're all shouting together. So the model of being an individual. And so before we discuss what's wrong with that, or what's right with that, let's expand his ideas. So I'll just say a couple of things I thought. Yes. He uses 3 philosophers, a Chinese guy, Italian guy, and a French guy. Right, ancient Chinese.
It wasn't Italian, was he? Spinoza.
Spinoza, is that not an Italian name?
A Jew from Amsterdam, I think he was.
Oh, right. Did he not go to Italy?
Not that I know.
Oh, I'm a terrible person. But Spinoza sounds Italian to me. Right. And then Gerard, or Gerard.
Yeah.
Right, a French
Gerard
guy.
even, yeah.
Right. And he says all these 3 people were writing in periods that was a sort of breakdown of identities. So the Chinese guy was the Warring States period, where the central power had lapsed and it was breakdown into warlords. Spinoza was in a period of dislocation, and then the post-war period was Gerard, who was in a period where people were sometimes trying to create something new, but the old didn't work. And he talked about the existentialists. And he uses a model from the Chinese guy, which I didn't really like, the Taoism thing. but the idea that people forcing you to take an identity, right? And so the maskless man is no good. You have to have two eyes and a mouth, and it was poked into the mask, and it was imposed identity by other people even, right? And anyway, he says all these three people deal with periods where people were trying to create identities or form identities, and their answer to it in one way or another was, don't take on an identity. And the book is called Against Identity. So there's a sense of historical in there, historical periods, but it does pose it as a sort of timeless way of living almost, or a timeless set of solutions. So I think that's interesting, is historical and non-historical things. But his most interesting one for me is Gerard, who basically says it's a critique of the existentialists. So the existentialists say, we are new people, we can do whatever we want, we don't have to be bound by the past, we can completely make our decisions. And he says, well, that doesn't really work. I mean, they all wear black turtlenecks, sweaters, right? And they all look the same, and they're all mouthing the same things, and they've got a set of views which are all modelled on each other or modelled on the key people, which is Sartre and what's her name? Camus. And the woman.
Simone de
Beauvoir, right? And he says they're sort of conformist in their own way. And I think it's interesting, these periods, we're in that period, aren't we? We're in a period where it becomes clear that the identities of the past aren't working, and you have to force your own identity. We've been in that period for a long time. That you can't use religion, you can't use nationality, you can't use race, you can't use sex or gender even. Even the gender stuff is difficult to use. So people are forced to create their own identities, or there are no identities into which you could partly settle, so people create this. He doesn't really say it in that way, but I think we're in that sort of period. And then his idea is that this is a destructive process. The creation of identity leads to people grouping together and conflicts between those groups because they can never fulfill themselves through their identities. Oh, and the drive for identity is linked to the drive to being, to be something or be someone, or to fully be. It's linked to the idea of existence. And he says the outcome of this in historical periods has been the idea that these identity groups get together and scapegoat someone, destroy that person or group or thing. Could be a goat, could be the Jews, very often the Jews. And then through that, there's a cathartic release, to get rid of the violence within the community, to bring them together, to have a shared set of things. And the scapegoat plays an important role. And his interesting thing is he says, for him, Gerard says this, that for him that's undermined by Christianity, historically undermined by Christianity, which is a history of the world written from the point of view of the scapegoat. And the scapegoat says, Jesus says, I've got no sins, but you've killed me, right? How did that scapegoating go for you? And they go, well, it didn't go very well. Let's not do the scapegoating. Let's have a universal brotherhood of man. And then, so Gerard's view and Douglas Alexander's view, or Alexander Douglas, is to say that we should emulate Jesus. Not like the people who are locked up in loony bins for saying I'm Jesus, but to say that we can free-floatingly be all these things. It reminded me of this song, I'm every woman, it's all in me, but it's I'm every person, it's all in me. And so through that, by not adopting identity, we're not stuck in those identity groups that fight each other. We're not stuck in the frustration of trying to be something that we can never be because the model never fits us and we're always changing anyway, but to be a definite thing. So in some ways I thought it was very attractive as a sort of argument. Is that roughly right?
Yeah. Well, I think you've alighted on what for me is the most interesting thing about this work, is the suggestion that the most effective critique of the cultivation of identity might be theological. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. If we take it that our humanity is a configuration of both the temporal and the eternal, and that's humanity in its consciousness of what is our action, but also what is beyond not only our action but our understanding of beyond our lifespan, or even historically one lifespan after another. I think it is important to reconsider that, and that it's possible that the cult of identity has come about in an attempt to find something that isn't arbitrary, that people can lock into, because without an acknowledgement of the eternal alongside our temporal existence, we make it so much more difficult for ourselves to try and hold the different aspects of ourselves all together. So the reintroduction of a theological approach, a theological element in critique, I think is useful and challenging.
Yeah, so we're all going to die. That's the end, finito. So what's it all about? So we must have meaning through humanity in one form or another. And so in the past, now as well, that's through family, that's through culture, that's through nation, that's through the world, or humanity's future. So, it's theological, but there's the humanist bent on the theological as well. So I sort of get that, Andrew, right? But isn't the big issue that a universalism shorn of particulars is what we've had for a bit, the free-floating things, and they're not nice people. There's the sort of the roving elites who are not of a nation, who are transhumanists or whatever. They're not actually very considerate about the real problems that people have got. And the global bodies that we've got tend to be the worst,
Well, yeah, but I'll put it to you that there are different manifestations of universalism. There's universalism as both an idea and an ideal that is to be, as far as possible, enacted. That has been characteristic of a humanism that, although it has humanity at its centre, does not preclude an acknowledgement of what is beyond us.
Oh,
so
yeah.
The humanism from the Renaissance until the 20th century really was nonetheless a configuration of human action and acknowledgement of divinity.
Yes. Okay.
And I think that if you have an idea of the universal as, in that context, as a stepping stone between what is close to us and what is infinite, as a kind of placeholder for eternity in what is necessarily our temporal existence, then that in that kind of universalism, then particular actualizations of such as nation are an actualization of that, of humanity as a configuration of temporal and eternal. Yeah?
Well, I agree.
But
But he doesn't do that, does he?
No, but the kind of global institutions you're talking about are not only a denial of the divine, they're a denial of humanity, except insofar as it pertains to the people who are on the circuit or on the elite. You know, it only stretches as far as Davos.
Yes. So I'm not saying he does that. So what he says is, you just reject identity, and you take on definite concrete forms to do various things, or to be, really. And what he says is that if we're not part of these groups, then we'll be more innovative. Rather than trying to keep modelling ourselves on things, we can do new things rather than be fixated on being the models. And I like that idea that he was trying to get to, the idea of being transformative through that as a mechanism for that. But what I think it fell down on was that there was no judgment. His sort of idea is that you step into a concrete manifestation of just what is human or what you do. And it's just an individual solution. You know, there is no judgment as to what, or convincing other people even, as to what is good or bad. So nation would be alien to that. There's no identity connected with nation, for example. And as we know, internationalism is national in form, you know, or democracy is seated in the nation. But the idea is that democracy works on a national basis, and it's through democracy that you get people's involvement, and then you can have an internationalist thing through that, but you can't have it outside of the idea of democracy, which seats itself in a nation, and it's the shared proclivities that are within a nation.
Look, you're right. He doesn't prescribe what to do. But what I think is positive about his writing is the argument that to do something, anything, or a range of things anew is preferable to modelling, to impersonating your chosen self-image.
But don't we stand on the shoulders of giants? Don't we model ourselves as an aspirational thing as well as a sort of... We don't have to... When we talk about identity, it's modelling on a set of allowed beliefs at the moment, isn't it? It's a set of... This is a fixed set of things of who I am. This becomes me.
Yeah.
But
you're not recommending that, are you?
No, but I'm saying that identity could be... there could be an to be... I want to be like Elon Musk, or I want to be like a brave soldier, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That can be... That doesn't have to be limiting in that way, does it?
No, it doesn't, no. So to say, as a writer, I identify with Shakespeare,
yeah,
as if.
Yeah.
There's now wrong with that.
But for him there is.
No, I don't know.
Oh, okay.
No, I don't think he's saying you can't regard anything or anyone else as exemplary. I think what he's going against is the cult of impersonating yourself, the cult of impersonation.
Right.
So...
And that's different how?
Well, let me put it to you, but not in the terms that he does. Let me put it to you that the cultivation of identity roughly translates to, or roughly corresponds to multiculturalism, yes? Roughly, yeah?
Not in his explicit form, but because of the periods of what the writers are talking about, it's when the centre cannot hold, it's when the essential identities are breaking down,
Yeah.
then historically it does.
Yeah.
But
Or now.
Yes, now it does.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? But in his terms, no.
Yeah, but let me put to you that what I think is the most pernicious thing about multiculturalism, and it's not the multi, it's the culturalism.
Right.
It's the expectation that we are enactments of an already existing description of the type of person we identify as. So it's the antithesis of agency.
Right.
Yes, and I think
Even
that's
with the cosmopolitans.
well, the cosmopolitans are in the ether supervising the identities that the other segments of the population
Yes.
are allowed to enact.
And picking and mixing a bit of that from that.
Yeah, and they,
themselves.
they can kind of graze across different identities, but even
And
they,
food groups.
their role is to keep them segregated,
Right.
and to, insofar as that there is, once you get into this syndrome, there is already a tendency to segregate. The role of the elite is to make sure that people stay in their lane, to
Yeah.
borrow that
Yeah.
phrase. And I think that's what he's arguing against.
Right.
And in that respect, I think he's onto something. And again, as I say, I think he's onto something when indirectly, through his chosen authors, he brings eternity back in. Let me say something a bit more about this. You see, for years and years and years, I've always thought of ideas of the eternal or ideas of the divine as occupying the space that humanity hasn't yet expanded into. But he's already said as much, that might be incorrect. That maybe a more truthful recognition of what we are and who we are is that our temporal existence also contains an acknowledgement of what is beyond our temporal existence. And you can call that God if you like. I think I'm increasingly inclined to do so. But whether or not you use that terminology, nonetheless an acknowledgement of what is beyond not only a single lifespan but a multiplication of lifespans is an important aspect of what it is to be human. Because it may well be the case, he seems to think that it is, that as I said, our temporal lifespan is, because of our consciousness or our acknowledgement of what is beyond that, is in some respect a configuration of what is temporal and what is eternal. And I think we may well lose a guiding principle if we lose sight of that altogether.
Yeah, I like that way of putting it. I get that. And there's that bit in Shakespeare, isn't it? How beautiful is humanity in thoughts divine, in action, wherever. I like all that. And I think you miss a whole lot. And I like that he's reintroduced that. I did like that idea. So we can't be like God, but we can be like Jesus in that we can take definite manifestations of the best, and that can be a universal guiding principle rather than have to fit ourselves within existing frameworks.
I like all of that, but you have in the process humanised it to the point where you are already suggesting that humanity is the totality. And what I'm suggesting is that, and I think he is too, is that to be totally human, we should have some acknowledgement that all of creation is not us.
Yeah, sure.
And I mean, and I don't mean in the crass way there is the environment. I mean in a in a timeless way that there is timelessness as well as our
Sure.
time-bound existence.
Sure.
And timelessness, as I'm trying to put it, is not the denial of time-bound life. It is an acknowledgement that there is always the newness of life, which is recurring many more times than we can even imagine. So that is no longer time-bound.
I mean, maybe. I
Maybe.
mean, I don't know. You see, I've read too much sci-fi and etc., but, you know, beautiful sunset, the Milky Way, the incredible, gorgeous creation and destruction and newness, as you say, and a dog looks up at the sky and goes, woof, and it means nothing to the dog. God backwards. Dog means nothing to the dog. We look at it and it means something to us.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe,
Yeah.
and
no.
I don't want to discount it, but
Yeah.
we are the ones that...
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I didn't mean to suggest that we weren't. I think that's absolutely right. That it's our consciousness of both our time-bound existence and also as part of our consciousness, our acknowledgement of that which is not bound by time, which is a social construction, isn't it? It is our
Yeah.
measurement according to the expenditure of our agency. You know, that's really,
Sure.
yeah.
Okay.
And the fact that we can do both, we can acknowledge what is timeless as well as being existing in time. That is the unique human capacity to mediate between temporality and eternity.
Right.
But in order for that to be the mediation of these two things, then it's not a good idea to reduce either one of them to a projection or subset of the other.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. Let me try and give him a kick in, though, in a particular
Okay,
way,
all right.
right? So this is the connection between some sorts of identity and material life or material reality, right? So one could argue that the nation is a reflection of things like a shared market, a shared language, a shared culture, a living together, and then a democracy and a set of laws and all sorts of set of things that is a real material existence. So to say arbitrarily is an identity like the other identities that are we create ourselves as individuals or models that we try and fit into underplays what is a nation. Same goes with class. So there is a material idea about your relationship to the production process, the labour market, etc., right? And so what he says about this production thing, I think is an interesting idea, but I think it's very wrong. He says we've got a basic set of needs, and once those are fulfilled, everything else is just about identity, really. So any extra consumption is sort of identity linked. Now, maybe in the future there might be elements of that, but the argument is that through being more productive, you free up more time and resources to do things other than just recreate yourself. And then even with better goods and better products, you're able to, through your consumption, live longer, healthier, in a more fulfilled way, in a more, I hate the word, but a way that opens up your choices, right? And his argument is sort of that the material is not really that important because of that basic idea. And then what's important is the idea of innovation, and it's not he says by not fitting into these models you can be innovative. Now, there's something to be said for that. But actually, a lot of the development and innovation is when people take one idea and go a bit further with it, or take one idea in one sphere of life and then apply it to another. And it misses that element of creativity, which I think a lot of creativity is. And so I think it's materially unrooted. And so it doesn't distinguish between identity characteristics which are part of the society in which you step into as a child, that are important to how it's run and governed and operate. You can reject them or not, I suppose, but it's not a neutral individual choice to just do that. Because you're in this world that you operate in, that you're born into. You make history, but not in circumstances of your own choosing. And his thing loses that. I know he says that the existentialists are wrong. He says the existentialists are wrong because they say you just make choices from nothing. But actually, the identities that are about and you're in are not just arbitrary. They are connected with how things operate and how the world works. So I don't think he's right on the material stuff. I don't think he's right on the really to just throw everything which is identity in together. And when you look at the people that he uses, the philosophers that he uses, they are people that discuss the necessity to form new identities when the centre could not hold, when things have broken down, when you have to do something new. If you looked at periods which seem to have more stability, that some people would connect with the idea of civilization and being able to stay in a place and build and develop, then he just misses that trick completely. So I really like it for some reasons, but in other reasons I think he's lost in the philosophy and he's linked to the material world, or even to differentiate between ideas of what is identity, just fatally undermines large bits of what he's talking about. So he only covers a bit of the picture.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, you are describing identity, or you're utilising it as a term which is applicable to a wide range of identifications with. So, whereas what I think he's trying to do is to argue against the pursuit of identity, the cultivation of identity, when identity is not, as you cited it, an expression of how things are working, but rather an identity, as he's polemicising against it, is cultivated as something that people resort to when the material world is not working.
Or the identity world is not working, almost.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Then he says, and if that's your reason for going into it, that's not going to work either. In which case, I think he's right. I mean, again, he doesn't use this terminology, but to paraphrase his argument, I think he's trying to expose identity as, in effect, the reintroduction of a kind of magical thinking, and a magical thinking that acts in the material world as a kind of modularization, so that people opt into a kind of magical thinking, which then becomes a self-enclosed module, which once you sign what isn't a social contract, but you contract into it, and as a part of what you contract into, other people in other modules are reduced to the status of non-playing characters. So there's you in your module, and you are people because you're enacting this thing that you identify with, that you are saying, I am the same as that.
Yes.
And other people, by virtue of not being in their module, are non-playing entities.
Right.
And that's what I think is right to rail against.
He sees in this a loss of agency
Yeah.
as well. Yeah, I get that. And I like that, I specifically like that bit. So, one answer to the argument is you adopt an identity which is connected with universals, or you create a set of institutions or ideas or organisation or approaches that allow for people to adopt these things without being crushed. I know the other thing we were reading that we read a bit was Mania by Lionel Shriver, who looks at this idea of a sort of groupthink which is incredibly destructive. It's an analogy for woke. But we know that people who try and adopt ideas that or identities which oppose those ideas have been crushed. And Lionel Shriver is very interested in that. She goes past that a little bit, and then once that her woke version Mania goes, there's a new Mania, which is a sort of equivalent the anti-woke thing. So she says we're riven by these manias of groupthink, and identity formation is not just an individual project, it's also a restriction of what people are allowed to do or say or think, right? So the argument could be that you have something which allows identities which are not destructive of other identities, that have got a universal character or component in it. And so individuals, yes, they sometimes can change things themselves, but generally speaking, we don't have the power to do that. So some sort of group identity to do with democracy or the nation or tolerance or liberal values or Enlightenment values or Western civilization or whatever you want to call it, right? The argument is that some of these approaches and ideas can allow for that taking on definitive norms without a sort of group mania that attempts to crush dissent or crush opposition. So I'm sort of thinking that one argument can be the ability to form identities which are connected with the idea of tolerance, experimentation, belonging, continuity sometimes as well. Those universal things are which have historically been connected with liking Shakespeare or being in a nation or wanting to do charitable works or wanting to trade with the rest of the world or wanting to educate or wanting artistic development free of constraints, or in fact not free of constraints but also constrained by a belief in these things, right? That identity formation could be quite a good thing.
Yeah, and the adherence to, or the looking towards universality in what you say, I'm attracted to. But as you've already said, there are different universalisms. You know, it's not, even the term is not universally identical.
Yeah.
You see, I'm coming round to the idea that you could pick on any institution or any entity and say this is going to be the vehicle for universalism, or for that matter, you put it the other way around. Universalism is going to be the means through which this institution or this entity, whether it, I don't know, the family or the nation or whatever, has its kind of, can actualise its sort of life-giving properties. Yeah.
Can open up a space for people to be people.
Yeah, but I think there is no institution that can bear the weight of that unless the idea of universality that it contains has at least one eye looking in the direction of eternity.
Right.
So universality as a kind of stepping stone between people and infinity, because it implies an infinite number of people that this principle, whatever it is applicable to. If it has that acknowledgement, then I think it can bear the weight. Or put it another way, I think
Well, it looks to its own dissolution.
it looks to what is beyond a human-centered universalism that acknowledges what is beyond the human.
Right.
Because a human-centered universalism that doesn't acknowledge what is beyond the human is not only a necessary abstraction, it's too abstract. It's because it's unreal. Because the reality is there is a recurrence of life that is beyond our capacity to understand it.
Sure. Like science would do that. No, science doesn't do that.
No.
Specifically doesn't do that.
Well,
I was thinking the Inland Revenue. We'll always have death. Two things you can't escape, death and taxes. So taxes are about a sharing of what we do.
yeah.
And then if we didn't have a sharing of what we do, what we would be as lonely individuals would be unable to mediate this connection. But look, of course you're right. What you're positing, there are no... it would be very difficult to do that. And I'm not sure whether anything has quite done that ever. But you can posit something else, is that why not the Chairman Mao dictum, let 1,000 flowers bloom? And then your universal will not necessarily be present in something that comes along now, but there might be something developing towards that. So you have a winner and you have a development of those institutions over time to make some of that, to make the future appear to mean something. If you don't have institutions that look to the future in a human-centered way, then it seems very difficult to have institutions that would look to the universal in a non-human way.
Yeah, but let me put it the other way around. That when let's consider the capitalist class at its high point, and in its most progressive phase, it was human-centered.
Yeah.
But its humanism did not preclude theology.
And nor should it. Right? Of course not.
Yeah, but what?
But in all its institutions, they weren't like that. Some institutions were and some weren't.
I'm not sure. You see, the law and the
money did say "In God We Trust."
The nonetheless modern habit of swearing on the Bible or whatever.
Yes.
It wasn't exiled, and I'm not saying let's have 19th century Church of England back.
Yes.
But what I am saying, there is something oddly enough, about the humanism.
Yes.
That to paraphrase Alistair Campbell, doesn't do God at all. Because it's, on the one hand, a recognition of what human agency can do, but possibly, well, I'm coming to think, asking too much of it at the same time.
Yeah.
So that there's an idea of our agency that is too big and too little at the same time.
Yeah.
It's too big to allow for the divine, but too little to do everything that needs to be not accounted for, but acknowledged.
There is an argument that the organisation of our institutions, let's take the idea of the arts. So, just it's not quite an aside, but I went to an MA show, and the MA show was about theatre and social activism. And so people were linking, doing little plays connected with DEI type issues, diversity, equity, inclusion. And in that, I thought that was just the assumption of the course. So that's what art, that was art in that purpose. And so what I always thought of was art for art's sake has got something of the divine in it. You know, it is of not even human, but of limitless seeking to whatever's out there. Sometimes it's intensely human, but even then, it like looks to the stars. It looks to the material world as well. And so, one of the breaks on any of our institutions being able to adopt an openness or an open-endedness which would grasp the divine or the forever or wherever, is that the open-endedness of human pursuits for their own sake has been destroyed and becomes in the service of something else, either like economic development or social inclusion or whatever it is. And so I do sort of think there are elements of the arts especially, but also bits of education sometimes. Not, as you say, not the sciences, because that is, we can only talk of what we know, right? But an expanding out view that you can have institutions like that even today if you got rid of the sort of, it has to be for this. So that's why I'm sort of, let lots of people try different things, and some of these things will come out and there'll be space for people to express those things. Whereas at the moment, you know it and I know it, we have students, we have young people who their horizons are constrained by a set of ideas that they're supposed to have or not have. And so like even the nation, even imperial times, right? The nation had this civilizing mission to free people from slavery, and because it was the right thing to do. Not because it was humanist, because we're all God's creatures and now it would be wrong to enslave people. And so that emphasis, I think you will not have it in an abstractly universal form or even a theological form, I don't think. You might have it, but it won't necessarily be in that form.
But you see,
there is a discussion about a theological resurgence among young people.
Yeah, there is indeed. Well, I just want to go back to what you said about art that isn't art, because it's so much bound up within the immediate present that there's nothing else there, there's nothing else present. But the same thing being in effect presented again without adding anything, or perhaps more importantly, without taking anything away. Because I think it's arguable, well, I think this, that the abstraction that is a necessary element in any art that is actually art is, as you suggested, a gaze that looks both ways, that doesn't lose sight of what is on the ground, what is temporal, but the abstraction is a movement towards something that is not us.
I may be lying in the
us.
gutter, but at least I'm looking at the stars.
Yeah. But you see, your example is I think a very good example of what I'm trying to say, which is that you might think that the art world would function as the place to reinvigorate the universal, but because it doesn't currently or very rarely have that inkling towards eternity, that's precisely what it isn't doing.
Because it's stuffed with instrumentalism that's either linked to identity or social justice or making money.
There's always an apparently inescapable end result, which is in mundane terms and is therefore antithetical to that which is striving for or looking towards something that's not mundane.
But you know my thing, try lots of different
Try
things
lots, yeah,
and see what works, and
Yeah,
see
yeah.
what sticks on to the wall.
yeah,
There's a Philistine element to that, but also that I don't think necessarily I know what the future's going to be. I've had enough time trying to work out what it was, and I've never quite got it right. And some things work that you don't expect them to, and some things don't work that you expect them to. So I'm sort of for an opening up of attempting things. Obviously, from a more experimental or even a less experimental point of view, in that it goes to values that we need, and sometimes quite prescriptive. And so I'm also open to initiatives in different spheres that are of a different character.
yeah,
And that's sort of because there's such a stultifying, you get new students and you know what they're going to think, or you know what they're supposed to think and the way that they've been pressured into it. And you know the and ahhing from the political classes about never trying to be pinned down or never trying to solve problems.
yeah,
And of course solving problems isn't the universal, but if you don't try and solve problems, you're not going to go anywhere or be able to look at anything. But not just from a pragmatic. The pragmatic point of view doesn't work on its own. You have to believe in it or do it for a reason, you know. So,
yeah, yeah.
All right, so you said that this wouldn't be long. This is an hour long.
Way, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So this is why these things last about an hour. You have enough stuff to say and then you run out of stuff to say. Right, till next time.
Two old guys gassing, yeah.
Two old guys gassing. All right, I'm going to stop now.